What if I told you that a quiet Canadian town just flipped the global metals market upside down, and all it took was a single tweet from Donald Trump? On one side of the border, Trump thunders before a roaring crowd, vowing to double steel and aluminum tariffs to a staggering 50%. On the other side, Canada answers not with a protest, but with $1 billion counterpunch, silent, swift, surgical. By the time Wall Street woke up, prices had soared 54%, factories scrambled, and a sleepy Quebec smelter became the epicenter of a new economic battlefield. This is the story of how Canada weaponized clean energy, rewrote trade routes, and humiliated the world's largest economy without firing a single shot. The 2nd of July, 2025. While most of the world was distracted, a seismic shift unfolded in a tiny Quebec town. Alouette Aluminum announced a massive $1.5 billion expansion at its Sept-Îles smelter. The goal? To secure North America's aluminum supply, but not for the U.S. Backed by Hydro-Quebec's vast hydroelectric power, this smelter was locked into low-cost clean energy deals, cutting emissions and earning coveted low-carbon credits. While America was busy hiking tariffs, Canada was busy creating the cleanest, cheapest aluminum on the planet. The trigger? Trump's aggressive move to double steel and aluminum tariffs to 50%, a political bombshell that instantly rattled global markets. Aluminum premiums in the U.S. Midwest jumped from $860 to $1,325 per ton, an overnight 54% spike that sent shockwaves from Detroit to Tokyo. Deals collapsed, supply chains fractured. The metal market, already fragile, was now in freefall. But this wasn't just coincidence. Canada's move was cold, calculated, a masterclass in economic warfare. Ottawa knew the playbook. Within hours of Trump's tariff announcement, Canada's Industry Minister Mélanie Joly convened emergency meetings. She declared the tariffs illegal, unjustified, and promised immediate countermeasures. Behind closed doors, a multi-layered strategy was unleashed. First, financial lifelines to Canadian giants like Rio Tinto. Second, preparation of mirrored counter-tariffs and strict import quotas on non-trade agreement countries. Third, a colossal $10 billion relief loan program to cushion Canadian businesses and bolster domestic manufacturing. But Ottawa didn't stop there. Canada committed to using only domestic metals for defense and infrastructure projects starting 2025, injecting millions into green tech R&D from EV batteries in Ontario to sustainable aviation fuels in Quebec. This wasn't just about defending aluminum. This was about reshaping the entire industrial base of a nation. As Trump's tariffs tightened, Canada was quietly diverting over 3 million tons of aluminum, once bound for the U.S. directly to Europe and Asia. Trading desks in Montreal and Brussels buzzed. Whispers spread fast. Canada's clean aluminum is 20% cheaper than the U.S. supply. European and Asian buyers locked in deals at pre-tariff prices. Meanwhile, U.S. automakers, caught flat-footed, watched helplessly as supply chains snapped. Factories in America struggled. Aerospace companies slashed budgets. Production lines delayed. Even the S&P Global Canada Manufacturing PMI plunged to 45.6, signaling contraction the worst since 2020. Yet while American industries suffocated under their own tariffs, Canada's ports thrived. At the newly upgraded deepwater docks of Duncan and Marcel Darn Keys, 69,000 tons of cargo per ship sailed directly from Quebec smelters to Europe and Asia. Not a single shipment needed to cross U.S. soil. In 2023, that port handled 718,000 tons. By mid-2025, that number was climbing fast. New cold storage systems, expanded intermodal yards, all designed to meet Europe's strict environmental standards. The message was clear. While the U.S. was building walls, Canada was building bridges. But why was Canada so perfectly positioned to strike back? Because Canada had an energy weapon that Washington didn't: hydropower. While U.S. smelters burned fossil fuels, Quebec's aluminum plants ran on renewable hydroelectricity. This distinction wasn't just environmental PR, it was a market weapon. In a world obsessed with net zero commitments, Canadian aluminum wasn't just cheaper, it was cleaner, greener, and more compliant with global emission standards. And thanks to trade agreements like CETA and CPTPP, Canada had diversified its exports far beyond the US. Gold shipments to the UK soared 30%. Oil flowed to Singapore. Pork penetrated Japanese markets. Pharmaceutical exports to Italy surged for small and mid-sized Canadian firms. Canada wasn't just surviving the tariff war, it was thriving in a newly reordered global economy. But the story isn't over. Because while Canada was busy redrawing the world's trade map, Washington was quietly plotting its next move. The question now is, can Canada sustain this momentum when the next wave of trade pressure hits? Or will Washington escalate into a full-scale economic war? Stay tuned for the next episode. We'll reveal the hidden strategies Canada is using to protect its green energy empire, the geopolitical stakes behind the metals race, and the critical question, is this the beginning of a new world order in trade? And is the US already too late to catch up? 2. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your predictions in the comments. Welcome back. In the previous part, we uncovered how Canada used clean energy, trade diversification, and lightning-fast policy responses to turn Trump's tariff war into a strategic victory. But here's the real twist. This wasn't just about aluminum. This was a signal that the global supply chain is no longer just an economic battleground, it's a weapon of foreign policy. And Canada, the unassuming northern neighbor, just rewrote the playbook. At the heart of Canada's success was one resource the US couldn't replicate overnight: hydropower. Quebec's rivers' cold, mighty, relentless fuel, an industrial machine capable of producing aluminum with the world's lowest carbon footprint. This isn't just sustainability, it's economic leverage. Because in an era where carbon credits are the new gold, Canadian aluminum isn't just a product, it's a passport to elite global markets. European buyers, squeezed by aggressive climate targets, now prefer Canadian metal, even if it means reshaping logistics chains across the Atlantic. But Ottawa's strategy ran deeper than energy. First, they anchored domestic sovereignty. By mandating the use of only Canadian metals for all defense contracts and infrastructure projects, Canada insulated itself from foreign pressure. That's economic self-defense in a hostile trade world. Second, they future-proofed. Billions were funneled into EV battery components in Ontario, hydroelectric expansions in Manitoba, and research into sustainable aviation fuels in Quebec sectors forecasted to dominate the next industrial era. Third, they built infrastructure to support the pivot. Ports, rail links, intermodal yards, all optimized to bypass the US entirely. Canada was no longer a secondary supplier, it became a first mover in the green metals race. As trade winds shifted, Canada's exports to non-US countries surged 5.7% in May 2025, hitting over 60 billion Canadian dollars, a national record. For the first time in decades, Canada's economy was no longer tethered to the whims of Washington. Trade agreements like CETA with the EU and CPTPP with Pacific nations provided unfettered access to premium markets without the shadow of US tariffs. And while Canada expanded, the US market contracted. American manufacturers, starved of competitively priced aluminum, watched production costs balloon. Detroit's automakers faced supply shortages. Aerospace giants struggled to budget for volatile metal prices. Meanwhile, their European and Asian rivals? They'd secured Canadian aluminum months earlier at prices the US could only dream of. This isn't just a shift in trade. It's a redistribution of industrial power. But there's an even bigger game at play here. Canada's green energy pivot hydro, clean aluminum, EV components isn't just about economics. It's emerging as a foreign policy tool. Think about it. Who controls the clean metals controls the clean tech revolution, and who controls the clean tech revolution dictates the next century of industrial leadership. By embedding itself at the core of clean supply chains, Canada isn't just selling products, it's shaping geopolitical dependencies. Countries eager to decarbonize their economies from Germany to Japan will need Canada more than ever, and that grants Ottawa unprecedented diplomatic leverage. But let's not be naive. Washington won't sit still. With Trump's tariffs acting as the first salvo, the U.S. is already considering deeper sanctions, supply chain restrictions, and even potential subsidies to revive domestic metal production. The world now watches. Will the U.S. double down and escalate into a full-blown trade war? Or will Washington pivot to invest in its own clean energy infrastructure to catch up? And crucially, can Canada sustain its momentum when the next economic storm hits? Because while Ottawa's playbook has worked brilliantly so far, resilience will be tested when political tides shift either in Washington, Beijing, or Brussels. This is no longer just a tariff story. It's a preview of the 21st century trade wars fought not with bullets, but with energy, environment, and supply chain supremacy. The question now is, which nation will master this new economic battlefield first? Canada, the US, or a rising power in Asia? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Who's playing the smartest game and who's already losing? To say. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into the economic battles shaping our world. We'll see you in the next one.